You have high achievers that are listening to your stuff. That's something I've been blessed with. I don't have a lot of fear. If someone asked me to go be the communications director in the White House, even though that was literally the stupidest thing I've ever done, I don't have any fear. I would have go ahead and did it. Don't live your life with fear. And it's not to say that you're not going to have anxiety. When I left Goldman at 32 to start my business, I had anxiety. I had worry, but it wasn't fear. Fear is a different thing. Then, of course, you need a couple of good failures. That'll sober your ass up really good. When I got my living ass kicked in the White House, this is another thing I would tell your listeners. You're having a bad day. Let's say like you're trapped in your house during a pandemic and you're feeling pretty miserable. Think about my ass getting fired from the White House on the 31st of July. I'm ejected from the White House and I'm on the cover of every New York-based tabloid. Why I'm bringing it up is like, who cares? Dust yourself off. Henry Ford, whatever you think of him, it's obviously a little bit of a lunatic, but he said a great line once, like, whether you think you can or you cannot, you're right. Just think about that. There's been a very interesting and very eclectic mix of people that have come to the SALT conference and that I have been able to, embrace and have sort of a good relationship with. President Bush did an amazing job. I had Will Smith one year, will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas. I had Francis Ford Coppola. He came to talk about The Godfather. That was really a lot of fun. Al Pacino I invited one year. But, I've also enjoyed Tony Blair. I built a friendship with Prime Minister Blair. And Richard Branson. I've had the opportunity to visit him down on his island from time to time.
One is, what traits do you look for in candidates you guys hire at Skybridge? And then on the flip side, how would you pitch Skybridge as a place to work?
Okay, I'm ready when you are. Thank you, my man.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Anthony. So,
pleasure to be here.
So, we're thrilled to have today on the Elevate podcast, Anthony Scaramucci, who's the CEO of Skybridge Capital. Anthony's background: you're originally from Long Island, went to Tufts and Harvard Law, started at Goldman Sachs, left to start Untitled Chapter, and then you founded Skybridge in 2005. You also served as the White House Director of Communications under President Trump. So, on behalf of our audience and students and professionals, really, thrilled to have you on today.
It's great to be here, John. Thank you for having me. I'm sitting here in my home office. This is my 51st day in captivity. And I think I have like nose hairs coming out of my ears, which I'm clipping. So other than that, I'm sorry about the lighting and everything like that, but
you're good. You are totally good. Thank you. So I think the question on everyone's mind, Anthony, is what is the first thing you're going to do once quarantine ends?
Well, I mean, listen, I'm going to my restaurant, the Hunt and Fish Club. I'm having myself the tomahawk steak with the meat on the bone. I'm going to probably have 2 dirty martinis and a lot of French fries, probably. That's not, is that the norm? Is that the best thing? I should be doing the intermittent fasting, like all of you, like Silicon Valley types, and like eating plant-based food. But I'm too old-fashioned for that. So I'm going for a steak at my old school restaurant that I own.
I love it.
Assuming I can get the restaurant reopened. We'll have to see what happens.
There you go. Hashtag goals, right? I think I like that. I think hopefully we don't have to have our mask on when we're eating that delicious dinner.
It's hard to know what's going to happen. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, the conversation I wanted to kind of focus a lot on your career experiences. I think first kind of place I probably wanted to start is you've obviously had a very impactful, career on Wall Street and in finance. Maybe, talk us through 2 or 3 of those key inflection points over your career, and maybe like what you learned from those in terms of, over your career.
Well, I mean, listen, I was mentoring somebody who's 33. I'm 56 now, so I'm an old timer. I had a 33-year-old come to see me via Zoom, like we're doing right now, lamenting about their life. It's not going well. They're idealizing this perfect 45-degree slope. They haven't quite become Mark Zuckerberg yet. They went to all the great schools. They did all the great things. They had very good mentors, and they're in the dumps, telling me they're in the dumps. And so my reaction to that is I totally get that. I can identify with that. When I was 25, leaving Harvard Law School, I went to the Harvard Law Library and I wrote down a list of goals. and I had all of these perfect goals, and I was going to do this X, Y, and Z. I was going to make this amount of money and do this with my life and so forth. And none of it happened the way I thought it was going to happen. And the point I was making to this 33-year-old is that when you're planning something, God is laughing. Okay, you're making the plans, the universe and God is laughing. And what you have to also recognize about life is that it's inherently unfair. So anybody listening to this podcast right now has won the lottery. That means you have the technology in front of you that you're able to listen to this. There's several billion people on planet Earth that don't even have internet access and are struggling for their food and living on pennies, if not small dollars a day. And so you have to work off of the appreciation and gratitude in life and not your expectations and where you think you should be and where your peers are and all that other stuff. And so that's my learning lesson from my 31-year career. And I'm not saying that with any level of righteousness or any level of sanctimony, because I was there doing the exact same thing. I was there marking myself to the market every day. I was there making comparative analyses. I was doing all of those things. I've stopped doing that, thankfully. And I think I've been able to approach life from the bottom up as opposed to the top down. And that would be my recommendation to people.
Yeah, no,
You'll be so much more relieved. You'll all of that stress, you have high achievers that are listening to your stuff and they want it badly and they want it, and they think it's a competition, but it isn't. The universe is not set up like that. There's an abundance in the universe and there's plenty of opportunity for everybody. And you would be better suited to really just try to live without fear and try to fulfill the dreams that you have, irrespective of the people around you. And so those are my lessons. That's my observation.
That's really helpful. I think on that point, what gave you the confidence to kind of start your own fund, right? I mean, you start your own fund, and then maybe take us behind the journey of building Skybridge and the prior fund, and just kind of what that taught you, what gave you the confidence and kind of go into it, and then kind of what did you learn along the way in that process?
Well, listen, I mean, I think that we're all products of our environment and our upbringing, and I think the legendary investor Byron Wien, who's now 90, said something to me about 20 years ago, which I said, well, that's absolutely true. There's something that happens to you from the age of 11 to about 17. That 6-year period of time, you begin the process of idealization of your life, and you begin the process of saying to yourself, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Now, some of that is a reaction formation to your parents. Like they're doing something that you dislike, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do it the exact opposite of them. Or they're doing something that you like, and you want to replicate elements of it. But then you have your own internal clock and your own internal mechanisms that are firing you up during the day. And so for me, I grew up with some level of financial anxiety. I don't want to ever say that I grew up poor. I didn't. We grew up in the middle class, and I would never dishonor my dad or demean his very hard work ethic by telling anybody that I grew up poor. I didn't. He was a hourly worker. He had a union job as a crane operator. He made a good living. It was resoundingly in the middle class. I got very lucky in that I grew up in a town called Port Washington. If you came to Port Washington, there's blue-collar people there. And then up on the water on Long Island Sound, there are very wealthy people as well. And so the tax base is quite good. And so I went to a very good public school system. But I can tell you that 11, 12, 13, there was a lot of economic pressure in our family because my dad's wages were going up and down with the recession and the economy. And so I made a pledge to myself that I was going to own my own business. I was going to run my own business and try to carve out my own financial destiny. And so when I got to Tufts and Harvard, really didn't have the money for those places. And so I carried into my career about $125,000 of debt, which 30 years ago was maybe almost like $400,000 of debt today. And so my number one thing was I was going to go work for a big company. and I was going to do as much as I could for that big company and work as hard as I possibly could until I could pay off my school debt. And once my school debt was paid off, I was, no matter when that happened, I was immediately leaving to go start my own business. And I'm going to tell you something that I think a lot of your peers know. You got to really know yourself. Okay. I had a roommate in law school who was beautifully suited for Goldman Sachs. You worked at Goldman. My roommate was beautifully suited. He was going to be a partner there. He had the form-fitting personality to make partner there and to excel at Goldman. I did not. Okay. I'm an Italian-American kid from a blue-collar family, and I would have had to have shaved all the sharp points off of my personality to try to fit into the style box that would have allowed me to excel at Goldman. And then I would have ruined myself in terms of what my artistic representation is to myself. No offense to Goldman Sachs. I mean, by the way, my friend, he was perfectly fitted for them. And so another big lesson, do what makes sense for you and what fits your personality. Don't try to fit yourself into a job because you think it's going to impress your parents, or you think it's going to sound good at a cocktail party or at the country club. Who cares? Nobody cares about you, man. Okay. When you are young, you think everybody's talking about you. When you get to be my age, you realize nobody's talking about you. And by the way, if they are talking about you, you're like, why are they wasting their time talking about me? You know, that's the point. And so I left intuitively knowing that I needed to start my own business. And I knew that was going to be good for my personal destiny, and it was good for that idealization that I had. And then Mario Gabelli, who you guys may or may not know, he's 80 now. He's a very famous money manager. Was on the Barron's advisor list for 30 years, et cetera. When I was 32 years old, he said to me, listen, you know, you got to go start your own business. You got the personality for it. You don't want to be at Goldman when you're 50. Moreover, you probably won't even be allowed to be at Goldman when you're 50. They'll probably fire your ass before that. You know, there's a very few people that get to make it at Goldman past 50. And you're going to want to work. You're going to be 50. You're going to be a young guy, very energetic, and you're going to want to work. So go start your own business. This way you're guaranteed to always have a job. So those were the elements that went into the cake of me starting my own business. So when you talk about the fear, you know, that's something I've been blessed with. I don't have a lot of fear. You know, if someone asked me to go be the communications director in the White House, even though that was literally the stupidest thing I've ever done, I don't have any fear. I would have go ahead and did it. And so don't live your life with fear. You know, remember what Steve Jobs said at Stanford in his commencement address, you know, you're going to be dead before you know it. So just, you know, go for things. Mel Brooks has the best line ever. I tell all my kids this, you know, relax. None of us are getting out of here alive. Okay. So go live your life, live your dream. And even if it doesn't measure up, the fact that you had the guts to go do something like that, you'll be so proud of yourself, you know? So am I the richest person on Wall Street? Absolutely not, you know, but I'm not the poorest. And I've had a very interesting, you know, buffet table of life experiences. You know, I've built a conference business. I've attended a gajillion conferences. I have friends all over the world. I don't know if I could have had that experience had I worked for a corporation. Maybe I could have. Who knows? But the fact that it's my own thing and the fact that I have to wake up every morning with that challenge is something that I really enjoy. And so, but you can't live with fear. And it's not to say that you're not going to have anxiety. You know, when I left Goldman at 32 to start my business, I had anxiety. I had worry. I think I got myself sick over the weekend of going to start my business. I was just like, okay, my God, there's no safety net. I'm out here on my own. I have no brand. How am I going to make this thing work? But it wasn't fear. Fear is a different thing. You know, you have to be smart enough to overcome your fear in life. And you have to like see through to the other side, no matter what happens. And then of course you need a couple of good failures. That'll sober your ass up really good. And then once you've had a good series of failures, then you build that resiliency and you're able to like realize you can handle almost anything.
That makes sense, Anthony. I think the couple, especially the knowing yourself part, I think is where a lot of people try to fit themselves in these boxes that don't really accentuate their strengths and kind of help them overcome the weaknesses. So I think spot on in that. And the second point is just life is long, right? To your, I think kind of, if you kind of think of, oh, I'm not where I need to be at 24, 25, 26, 30, there's a long way to go. So you can recover, learn, and kind of move on from that. So I really love that advice that you gave, and then kind of doing that without fear. I think kind of related to that question, you wrote a book called, How to Find Your Fortune Without Losing Your Soul, in finance. It's taken me a while to figure out, even if that's even a possibility, and kind of, I struggle with that a lot, right? So what is your secret? And some of this may be related to the answer from prior, but kind of what is your secret in that? Obviously, a lot of our audience are young professionals who are going on to different careers in business, finance, technology, et cetera. What can they do to kind of overcome that as well?
Well, I mean, look, I mean, the point of my book is I was trying to write a rite-of-passage book. I mean, I wrote some funny stories now. I mean, I was like literally on my first job interview at Goldman, I was in 100% polyester. I didn't have the money, and so I bought a cheap suit from Cy Sims, which is not even around anymore. And I remember the Goldman partner looking at me, he's like, dude, you're smart, but you're like the worst dressed person that we've ever met. And I remember thinking, what the hell does he know? I thought I looked great. Meantime, I was like fully flammable for the job interview. So I try to tell people the real story, not that hagiographic story. I could tell you my resume and the different things that I've done. You say, okay, that sounds impressive, but then you don't see behind the scenes. You don't see all those warts. So what I would tell people is don't be afraid of the warts. Michael Dell became a business associate of mine 20 years ago, and he had a great line. He said, look, there were 5, 6, maybe 10 mail order PC companies in the mid 80s when he got started building computers in his dorm room and ultimately creating Dell Computer. And he said he had to make maybe 8,000 decisions, and he had to go 95 to close to 100% on those decisions to get things right. But when he was making a bad decision, or when a product design came up that was flawed, he didn't let it annihilate him. He said, okay, that's supposed to happen. And I think, meeting guys like Mark Andreessen or Ben Horowitz or having them speak at my conferences is that they know intuitively that a lot of the stuff that they're doing is going to fail. And so I would say to you, you have to think of yourself like a rubber ball, not like a piece of bone china. And so when you drop and you hit the ground, you've got to be ready to bounce off the ground. You can't allow yourself to get shattered by a dream that you had, it's not going well, or by a business career decision that you made that's not going well. But the flip side of that is you have to have a delicate balance. You don't want to day trade your career. So if it's not going great, you don't want to leave after 6 months or a year, because then someone's going to look at your resume and say, okay, that person's a job hopper. They're never really happy. They've got ants in their pants. Mm-hmm. And so you can't day trade your career. You have to do something you really, really love, which will energize you every single day and will keep you young. Okay, remember what Coco Chanel said, the fashion designer. She's one of my legendary all-time heroes, unbelievable entrepreneur, a homely woman who started Chanel, okay? And she renamed herself Coco. I mean, how cool is she, right? And what did Coco Chanel say? Well, she said a lot of things. Number one, you get the face that you deserve when you're 50. And now we have Botox and filler, but back then we didn't. And so what she was basically implying is if you got a frown on your face and you're sad all day and you're pissed off, well, then you're going to look like that by the time you get 50. And her point was relax into life, enjoy the process of life, so that when you get to be 50, if you're not going to a dermatologist, you look young and happy. Second thing she said, which is another great line of hers, was, wow, that's what you think of me? Well, you know what? I'm never thinking about you. Okay, it's just like a great line. It's like, just beat to your own drum, live your own life, and not worry. And so if you're looking for role models, Coco Chanel, to me, in Paris before the war and then during the Nazi occupation, this woman was legendary. And just think of her brand today, 100 years after she started. Look, these jobs are very similar. They're relationship-based jobs. They're based on core competency and inspiring trust in people. And it's based on having high integrity. If you have high integrity you're going to go on and you're going to have an amazing amount of friends. When I got my living ass kicked in the White House, this is another thing I would tell your listeners. You're having a bad day. Let's say like you're trapped in your house during a pandemic and you haven't been able to go to a restaurant in like 60 days and you're feeling pretty miserable. Think about my ass getting fired from the White House on the 31st of July. When my wife and I are fighting, I'm having personal problems. I'm ejected from the White House and I'm on the cover of every New York-based tabloid for like 4 straight days. So if you're having a bad day, okay, put the thing into perspective, okay, and think of what was going on for me at that moment. And why I'm bringing it up is like, who cares? Dust yourself off, forgive yourself for your mistakes, admit them. You got to own your mistakes. I made some colossal mistakes. I'm not ever blaming anybody for anything that I did that was stupid, but I'm also smart enough to like dust myself off and move on. And so I think that that's a big lesson for people. But if you're expecting things to go a certain way and you get agitated if they're not moving perfectly in the 45-degree angle that you're expecting your career to go in, wake up. Okay. My brother-in-law, who was a phenomenal guy and had everything going for him, beautiful children, great career. He had an esophageal issue and they went and scoped him. He was 35 years old. This was 1999 and he had stomach cancer. And it was a very unusual thing to have at that age. And so they went to Sloan Kettering, they operated on him and he survived 10 years. And when the cancer came back, unfortunately, it took his life. And so he died in June of 2009. I think about him a lot. He was a phenomenal guy. He was 44 when he died. And so that was very unfair. He left 2 beautiful kids and a beautiful wife, and he was a great guy. He had tremendous energy and tremendous talent and passion. And so I'm sure he was not expecting when he left college to be dead 22 years after he left college. And the point I'm making is that, like, you can't control so many different variables. If you're there obsessing about all the variables in your life and trying to control them all, you're really missing out a lot on the process of life. Flip side is if things are going well for you and, life is unfair, but you're on the other side of the lottery where you've won the lottery, you also have to know that and you have to enjoy that. You have to I try to wake up in the morning and I say, okay, what are the things am I super grateful for today? And if you start the day like that, if you just said, okay, here are the 5 things that I'm pumped about my life today. Does it suck that I'm in my house? Yes. Does it suck that my nose hairs are growing out of my ears because I haven't seen sunlight in 60 days? Absolutely. Am I getting fat because I'm eating all my wife's home cooking and I'm not exercising enough? Sure. Okay, but who cares? I'm healthy. I got great kids, thank God. And my business is getting crapped on right now, but so what? It'll survive and I will figure it out. And just remember what Steve Jobs did. He got ousted from Apple Computer. He started Next. He created Pixar. Then he went back to Apple Computer. Michael Dell, he'd be mad at me for bringing this up, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. Michael Dell, when they asked him, well, Apple, Steve Jobs just returned, what should they do? He was at Comdex and he said, well, they got a lot of cash on their balance sheet and Apple's going nowhere. So Steve Jobs should return the cash to the shareholders. And so, he went on to create the iPod and then he went on to create the phone before he died. But there was a legendary day where Apple Computer stock crossed over market capitalization-wise Dell Computer. And of course, he sent out a to-all email to everybody to let them know that, betting against him was a mistake. And why am I bringing that up? Because that's got to be you. That's got to be you in your life. Things are going to go right. Some things are going to go wrong. But you've got to be that person that can jump up like a spring when bad things are happening and just excel. And then you know what? It's infectious. People are going to want to be around you. They're going to be like, okay, that person, he or she is a winner, and people are going to want to be around you, and they're going to want to do business with you.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think I appreciate that, the perspective of having that, knowing where you are, and then kind of continuing to put that work every day. I think that's awesome. A few other kind of questions from my end, but obviously, like in your mind, we're going through this crisis, which has humanitarian, repercussions as well as kind of overall repercussions to people's lives and careers and stuff like that. I guess, what is your sense of coming out of this? What's the world going to look like? But also, what are the biggest opportunities for young professionals to kind of adapt and thrive in, during and post this?
Well, I mean, here's the thing I would say to you is that, like, it's happening to everybody. You've got a work stoppage in the United States. 2/3 of the people are forced into their homes. Only essential services are really still going. You've got 4 billion people that live on planet Earth in the Northern Hemisphere that have been affected in some way by the COVID-19 situation. So put it in perspective. I have a friend of mine that owns a pizzeria in town. He went to high school with me, and his family's owned that pizzeria for 50 years. I went down there the other day to pick up some pizza, and his wife came out with the mask on, and she had the pizza for my kids. And her name is Mary, and she's like, Anthony, I said to Mike, we're so lucky we didn't live through the Depression. We didn't have to live through any wars, blah, blah, blah. But man, the pandemic, we're living through a pandemic. And it's always have that wonder of what life would be like if you had to do that. And so what I would tell people is you want to be that person that got through this with your character and your integrity and your humor and your humanity intact. You want to be that person. You don't want to get bitter or cynical or derisive as a result of what's going on. Second thing I would tell you is that your career can absorb and your business can absorb what's going on in the world right now, as long as you have your health. So focus on your health and focus on what is the best protocol to make sure that you and your family members, the people that you love, are safe. I think that is the number one thing. And then lastly, I think this is also of equal importance. Set your expectations not low for yourself. You should always have high expectations, but where unhappiness comes from is unmet expectations. So the fact that I'm up today and I've had 2 meals, I get to watch CNBC, I get to talk with you, I'm on the phone with my clients, I got my kids outside that door right there, and then I'm going to take a ride over to my mom's house and see her. That is a very blessed day. Okay, am I conquering the world? Am I taking a company public? Am I, running for office right at this second? No, I'm not doing any of those things. But there should be joy in the simplicity of what's going on around you in your life.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think
if younger people dial into that more, they'll make smarter decisions and they'll be more clear-headed. They'll be less anxious about where they're going.
No, that's awesome. I think sometimes you lose sight of that and kind of where you think you need to be at every single person, but just kind of living in the moment and taking advantage. I think that you couldn't put it any better. We'll do a few like rapid fire questions, Anthony. I want to get your thoughts on a couple of these topics. You organized the world famous SALT conference. Who are some of your favorite speakers from that over the past few years?
Well, I mean, I have so many of them, but I mean, I would say to you that, President Bush did an amazing job. I had Will Smith one year, will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas. I had Francis Ford Coppola. He came to talk about The Godfather. That was really a lot of fun. Al Pacino I invited one year. But, I've also enjoyed Tony Blair. I built a friendship with Prime Minister Blair. And Richard Branson. I've had the opportunity to visit him down on his island from time to time. There's been a very interesting and very eclectic mix of people that have come to the SALT conference and that I have been able to, embrace and have sort of a good relationship with. Michael Milken, who runs the Milken conference, has become a really close friend. And he has spoken at SALT now. He did SALT Singapore. He almost did SALT Abu Dhabi. He had to cancel last minute. He's done the Vegas SALT probably 3 times. And I go to his conferences, and we have a very close relationship. And so I think that's another big learning lesson for young people. work on your network. You know, sometimes we have a tendency to, you know, you get reclusive. I told a great story in one of my books, Hopping Over the Rabbit Hole, that I was at a cocktail party when I had just gotten to Goldman Sachs. And this is when they were at 85 Broad Street, and it was up on the 30th floor. And I was up at a cocktail party, a lot of partners there. I was 25. I was super intimidated and super self-conscious. And I was like, okay, you know, I feel awkward going over to say hello to that person. And that's the absolute wrong way to be. You know, force yourself out of your comfort zone and out of your style box. And the point of me telling that story is that I forced myself to break down that level of self-consciousness and break down that level of, you know, feeling that what the hell do I have to add to somebody that's a partner here at Goldman Sachs? And lo and behold, turned out I did. And they were interested in listening to me, and I was interested in learning from them. And you're good enough. You know, I tell my kids, you know, you're good enough, just as good as anybody and better than most. And you have to think like that about yourself in life.
Yeah.
You know, and not with any level of arrogance, of course, but just with like, okay, hey, I'm here to play, you know?
Yeah, no, I think the networking, like you're saying, kind of micro as well as macro, just kind of making that one step a day, you know, one step, kind of meeting new people, et cetera, and putting yourself out there. I that's been so helpful to me over my career. So I love that advice. Who have been your mentors on that note, kind of in the world of, you know, business or finance, and kind of what lessons have you learned from them? Maybe one or two people that have really influenced you. You talked about, you know, Copolla, you talked about Milken, but, you know, any others that come to mind?
Well, you know, listen, I would say Ken Langone, who's the founder of Home Depot, just wrote a book called I Love Capitalism, which is a phenomenal book. I would say that Dick Grasso, I don't know if you would remember him, but he was the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. He helped get the stock exchange reopened after 9/11. Phenomenal human being. Vinny Viola, he runs Virtu. He's a great human being. You know, I would say, again, just thinking, you know, I mean, across business lines, you know, Michael Dell, even though Michael Dell's 1 year younger than me, he is 10,000 years older than me in terms of him being an older soul. So he's given me a lot of good advice over the years, you know. And so I guess the thing is, this probably sounds cliche, but it's really come true in my life. Don't underestimate anybody's intelligence. And when you're with somebody, you may be able to, like, I have a friend of mine who's a detective, and he's got a 2-year college education, went to high school, but he's been a detective for 25 years on the New York City police force. And he's one of, by far, the smartest people that I know. And I've learned so much from him about human nature and how people think and what motives are and things like that. So don't like narrow down your window, and don't be a status snob, meaning, you know, oh, okay, well, that guy's got a PhD from Harvard, I may learn something from him. You may learn something from the person that doesn't have the PhD, but maybe as smart. You know, I used to tell people at Goldman, you guys think you're so smart, but you're no smarter than the kids in my neighborhood. It's just that they didn't have the chances that you had to get to where you've gone. You know, there were kids in my neighborhood. There's one kid in my neighborhood who's a brilliant guy, but, you know, lost his father at a young age, never got himself to college. He's running a very successful business here on Long Island, but it's probably smaller scale than it could have been because he just didn't have those opportunities, you know? So don't be overly judgmental of others. I think it's another big lesson.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. One thing, Anthony, I've really appreciated, I kind of with you and your perspectives here, but also over time, is I think you're very kind of rooted in kind of facts and also very kind of self-introspective, very practical, I think, take an approach to things and kind of all the things that you do. So maybe in a self-introspective way, you know, what are one or two lessons learned from your time being in the public eye, you know, kind of with your you know, position that you took at the White House as the director of communications, and what did you learn from that experience?
Well, unfortunately, I mean, you know, what I learned, Washington is a very rough place. I mean, when you're close to power, people have a tendency to do diabolical things to each other. And so you have to be way more cautious and way less naive than I was. But, you know, the other thing I learned, which is really more about myself, is that, like, you know, you can do it. whatever you think the other person is doing, you're totally capable of doing it, and so don't doubt yourself. And I can tell right away, like Henry Ford, whatever you think of him, it's obviously a little bit of a lunatic, but he said a great line once, like, whether you think you can or you cannot, you're right. Just think about that. You think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Whichever way you decide, that's how you're going to be. And I definitely have learned that.
Yeah.
You can play anywhere. You can bring your game into any space and play. And so don't lose sight of that either.
That's awesome. And the last thing we'll end on it. Elevate obviously has an audience of 2,000 to 3,000 students who are kind of at all these institutions and kind of, like you said, maybe on the right side of the curve, but kind of, are also very career minded, et cetera. It's two-part question. One is, what traits do you look for in candidates you guys hire at Skybridge? And then on the flip side, how would you pitch Skybridge as a place to work?
I mean, what I would say about Skybridge is, I started the company 15 years ago, and I have sort of like three main tenets of principles in terms of managing that company. And so the first one is, no one has ever worked for me. And so if you're at Skybridge, you're working with me. Even though I'm the principal and majority owner and the managing partner, it's a collaboration. Okay, so cultural tenet number one is it's a collaboration. Cultural tenet number two is I believe in autonomy. Now, but if I'm giving you a lot of autonomy and I'm delegating a lot of responsibility to you, then you have to actually step up. Concomitant with autonomy and responsibility is accountability. Okay, so you have to be someone that's willing to take that, and therefore you have to be accountable. So, you're going to be measured by how well you're doing. That's not to say you're going to be measured, precisely, or you're not allowed to make mistakes. Of course you are. How can we grow if we're not making mistakes? And you should assume, if you're working for me, or working with me, I should say, you're going to have a lot of slack that way, because I get it. I get people make mistakes. But the last thing is attitude, and I've been talking a lot about that in this session. You have the right attitude. I'm not into cynicism. I'm not into pessimism. You got to be gung-ho and ready to go. And so if you wanted to work at a place like Skybridge, you have to have those elements. Everything else, in my opinion, is trainable. Everything else is technical. But those sort of ethereal things are super important in a company like ours. It's a very small company. We do a lot of different things in the the way we interact with people. But yeah, that's what I would say.
That's perfect. Well, I think, first of all, on behalf of your audience, I want to thank you for your time, Anthony. Really, I'd say a couple of ways to check out and interact with Anthony. He's got a really popular podcast that he does with his wife. I think it's right now on hiatus, but it will be back. So check that out. You can follow him on Twitter and any other things you want to kind of tell the audience to where they could find you, Anthony, where you're really.
Well, yeah. I'm at Scaramucci on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn, where I try to write, once or twice a month on different topics I think are interesting. But I mean, you could, I guess the best thing I would also encourage you, not that you even have to buy my books. I mean, I've written several bestsellers, and if you don't believe me, you can come into my basement. So I'll tell you what, if you want to copy one of my books, they should reach out to you. You email me and I'll mail it to them. Okay.
You got it.
They don't even have to buy the book, but so I'm happy to share those with people.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Anthony. I think our community kind of built this mentorship network, and hopefully, people from like you can I think are super helpful to this continued growth.
All right. Well, thank you. It's great to be on.
You got it. Thanks, Anthony.
All right. Take care, man. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
I enjoyed that. Thank you. It was a lot of fun.